Well, here we are. I am John Atack, and this is a man who has actually become a good friend of mine, Shawn McCraney. Hi, Shawn.
Hello, John. Great to see you again.
Yeah, and you've been away on holiday in Hawaii with your family and having a fantastic time, while the rest of us have all been, having to keep the grindstone going. How could you
Yeah,
do such a thing? So
I'm so
uncaring.
selfish. It's my sociopathy that made me take a vacation.
Yeah, yeah, you should be sacrificing yourself to everything
Yes.
all the time. That's the best
Yeah.
way to. I
It-
went on vacation too. As I've told you, I went to Turkey, and I didn't particularly want to go. My wife's writing a novel which has got the Empress Irene in it, who was there in kind of 700 and something, and so she really wanted to see the place. And I'm kind of, oh, and what an incredible place!
wow.
People were really friendly, which surprised me. I expected them to be surly, I
Uh,
think, for some reason.
Wow.
Istanbul is like historically maybe one of the most interesting places in the world because it goes back, into ancient Greek times, and
Sure.
they've got stuff ever since. And you've got the Hagia Sophia, the
Wow.
fourth biggest church in the world, now a mosque, um, and opposite it, the Blue Mosque. And
Wow.
my dad was really keen on the Blue Mosque, and I've always kind of got, oh, I don't like those little twists on the outside of the dome, and then you see it. It's, oh, what? And walk inside, oh, tranquility, just amazing. But
Wow.
yeah, and the Hippodrome, where you still got columns from the Roman emperors who ruled there, and oh, just amazing.
Amazing.
So, and then we went up to Iznik, Nicaea, where the first council of the Christian Church was held in 325 AD. That was a buzz. This
Wow.
document, I believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, which is the basis of Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant churches,
Yeah.
and one of the most influential things ever said by human beings.
Yeah.
So that was, it was great. It's lovely. And it's not what we're here to talk about, but I thought we might as well talk about it.
We're talking about vacations. I'm envious of that vacation,
Oh,
but
well, come.
I wouldn't have the education to know that that pillar was from the Roman Empire, and so I just walk around. Blah, 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 blah. You have
Yeah,
the education to know what you're looking at.
that's what you think. But I actually used a skill called reading
Oh,
and read the little plaque.
yes.
Yeah, just I mean, we were lucky. We went to the Basilica Cistern, which is underneath. It was the biggest reservoir there, and it's got 336 9-meter high. That's about 10 yards high marble columns underground. The movie From Russia with Love has a chase scene
Wow.
in there, and more recently, Tom Hanks in Inferno, um,
Wow.
written by the deplorable Dan Brown. We won't go into that. Was filmed there, and all of these columns, all of this, you know, reflected reflections in the water, and all of this stuff, and lots of people doing selfies. But we were lucky; we were queuing outside, and there was a great long queue, and this tout came along. He said, "I can get you in there, and I'll show you around 20 euros or something like that." And so I said, "Oh yes." And my wife said, "Oh, I don't know about that," because she's a lot more sensible than I am. And we ended up jumping the queue. He gets us in, and we get inside, and he says, "This is where one of the James Bond and a younger film were made." So he said, "Yeah, From Russia with Love and Inferno." And he's the guide, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Your guy, him.
but he pointed out so many little things. Like there's a column that has tears carved into it that was carved by the guys that built it way back,
Wow.
um, as a memorial to all of their fellows who died in the process of putting these columns in. And he showed us where the
Wow.
hole was, where they put new columns through, and
Wow.
it's amazing brickwork where you've got these thin bricks and then a layer of mortar, concrete
Yeah.
mortar, which is how the Byzantine and Roman mob built. Just something very beautiful about it. But anyway, that's not what we're here for. We're here
Well,
to,
let's talk about what we're here for.
what are we here for? If I ever find out, well, let me know if you do.
Eh,
I'm going to start with an extract. I got a few things from this book here. Today, our
oh,
men,
Robert Hare.
Robert Hare, the man who's probably the world's leading authority on psychopathy, or so we are told. And I've got a couple of good quotes, so I'm going to. People keep complaining that I talk too much, and I'm really sorry about that. It's not going to stop me.
A lot in there, brother. A lot that's in there.
Yeah, probably too much, frankly. I should squeeze some of it out. But this is a quote from a book called The Bad Seed by William March. And it says, good people are rarely suspicious. They cannot imagine others doing the things they themselves are incapable of doing. Usually, they accept the undramatic solution as the correct one and let matters rest there. Then, too, the normal are inclined to visualize the psychopath as one who's as monstrous in appearance as he is in mind, which is about as far from the truth as one could well get. And I think, very handsome Shawn McCraney proves that point. These monsters of real life usually looked and behaved in a more normal manner than their actually normal brothers and sisters. They presented a more convincing picture of virtue than virtue presented of itself. Just as the wax rosebud or the plastic peach seemed more perfect to the eye, more what the mind thought a rosebud or a peach should be than the imperfect original from which it had been modeled.
Amazing.
So, plastic peach, that's not very nice, is it?
Plastic peach. Yeah. I think it's dead on. Dead on.
And the important thing is that what we're here doing today and what we've done before is to help people realize that they do need to be a little bit more skeptical. Yeah. And this ancient human concept that if you look like Quasimodo, you're probably evil. Whereas if you look like, I don't know, Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp actually doesn't have much of a reputation anymore, does he?
Yeah,
Bless him. I went and saw Jeff Beck the year before he died, and he was absolutely brilliant. And then this bloke came on stage and started singing, I think is the word that's used for it. It's like, why is Johnny Depp on the stage with Jeff Beck? This is just wrong. But never mind. Isolation. So anyway, I must be sleep deprived. I'm babbling. Here's another one. This is from an essay signed "A Psychopath in Prison." That's who wrote it. He will choose you, disarm you with his words, and control you with his presence. He will delight you with his wit and his plans, and you do, Shawn. He will show you a good time, but you will always get the bill. He will smile and deceive you, and he will scare you with his eyes. And when he is through with you, and he will be through with you, he will desert you and take with him your innocence and your pride. You will be left much sadder, but not a lot wiser. And for a long time, you will wonder what happened and what you did wrong. And if another of his kind comes knocking at your door, will you open it? So that's the prelude. I've got one more from this little book, and then we'll move 10 years forward to his next book. Yeah, somebody did complain the last time we talked that I talk too much. And I had to say, you're right. I do. There's no cure for it. Many clinicians mistakenly assume that antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy are synonymous. They aren't. Antisocial personality disorder, and of course, psychopathy is no longer in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, nor is sociopathy. Only antisocial personality. Antisocial, since 2012, there's been no such thing psychiatrically as bizarre. And as he's saying, it's not the same thing. Antisocial personality disorder refers primarily to a cluster of criminal and antisocial behaviors. The majority of criminals easily meet the criteria for such a diagnosis. Psychopathy, on the other hand, is defined by a cluster of both personality traits and socially deviant behaviors. Most criminals are not psychopaths, and many of the individuals who manage to operate on the shady side of the law and remain out of prison are psychopaths, or politicians, as we also call them. So there's a starting point, and I just have one more before we find out what you think about all of this.
Yeah.
Because that's very important. 10 years later, so that book was 1993, 10 years later, he's actually, in that book, he says sociopathy, psychopathy mean the same thing. By Snakes in Suits, this book here, he's 10 years later, he changed his mind and he is finally grading these things. And I think it's highly relevant to your situation. He says, psychopathy is a personality disorder described by the personality traits and behaviors that form the basis of this book. Psychopaths are without conscience and incapable of empathy, guilt, or loyalty to anyone but themselves. Sociopathy is not a formal psychiatric condition. It refers to patterns of attitudes and behaviors that are considered antisocial and criminal by society at large, but are seen as normal or necessary by the subculture or social environment in which they developed. Sociopaths may have a well-developed conscience and a normal capacity for empathy, guilt, and loyalty, but their sense of right and wrong is based on the norms and expectations of their subculture or group. Many criminals might be described as sociopaths. Now, before throwing this open, this question has come up every time we've talked. You are a man who has empathy.
I do now.
Yeah, and it's developed, and you are somebody who was in a subculture, from your descriptions of your mother and father and the Mormon church, dare I say, you were in a subculture that actually promoted your negative behaviors. So, you know, your mom asking you to get out of the car and thump somebody, you'd flip the bird at her, you know, when she's driving by.
Right.
So I think this matter of conscience, empathy, is the essential. Remorse. You do feel remorse now, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, greatly. But that said, John, I got to take you through something that just happened this morning.
Yeah.
Just this morning. And it's in harmony with what has happened with interviews with other people in the past, going to Hawaii, and what happened this morning. In the past, people have tried to say, well, it's not God who changed you, Shawn. It's just your own. And so I have to say, well, maybe that's true. And so in Hawaii, my family noticed I wasn't really having much fun in the most idyllic scene possible, that I was just kind of dead to anything. I didn't care because I had trained my mind to not enjoy the world around me. So we had a conversation in the family, and I realized I was probably approaching life wrong. So in Hawaii, I said, I need to get rid of my heaven perspective only and start to re-embrace some of loving this world like I did when I was young, and maybe put a little bit away of the dying to the flesh, live to the spirit, look to Jesus only, and enjoy the flowers. So I did that. I really did. And it opened me up. But I realized in coming back to society and not being sequestered in an idyllic place with just my family, having embraced more of this world, more of old Shawn has come back. And this morning I had a guy confront me, and it was almost a criminal scene in what came out of me to manage him. And so I realized that the mindset that I embraced is necessary, but it has to be embraced with humility and selflessness. So I've learned a lot, but that guy, that dangerous person, is alive and well in the man you're talking to. I have been able to take a different personality, so to speak, that is not of me, that is of spirit, that is of truth and love, and manage my life through that effectively. But as I even let go a little bit and try to enjoy the world around me, the people I find as perpetrators need to be policed, and I need to do the policing. So it's really bad. Yeah.
What an interesting conflict. And I mean, firstly, I can't remember where it comes from, but it is attributed to Jesus. Heaven is all around, but men do not see.
No, it's not Jesus. But he
I
did
think it's
say
from
heaven is in you. What?
Sorry, it's
not from Jesus. That's not something he said.
the Gospel of Thomas.
Oh, well, that's a speculative, questionable gospel.
Well, it wasn't accepted in Nicaea,
Yeah.
that's for sure, in 325 when the Emperor Constantine decided which books
Yeah.
would be in the Bible.
Right.
And at the same time, the Acts of John was
Yeah.
denied, which I think they certainly have more right to be in the Bible than the Revelation, I would say, in terms
Yeah.
of their authority. And there are two versions of the Gospel of Thomas. There's the Oxyrhynchus version from Egypt, and that is, as you say, highly questionable, very beautiful.
Yeah.
And then there's the Nag Hammadi, and the Nag
Yeah.
Hammadi is as authentic in terms of its origins. It's an original piece of
Yeah.
writing. So it's attributed as a saying of Jesus in a book that is non-canonical. I accept that, but it's also true. Heaven is
Yeah.
all around,
Well,
but men do not see.
I could agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think you've touched on something that is so important that I'm an agnostic, as you know. Whether or not you were touched by God is a decision that you and God make.
Right.
It's not for anybody outside. It's not, for
Right.
whatever we believe to tell you what to do. I don't think. But coming to a point where, as many Christians do, one sacrifices oneself.
Yeah.
You die to the flesh. I think becomes very dangerous and very harmful. There was a meeting between eminent psychologists and neuropsychiatrists and Tibetan Buddhists. And I'm not a big fan of Tibetan Buddhism, in case anybody's worried. I'm not. But the thing that was said there, one of the monks said, "You talk about compassion, and you mean a feeling you have about other people. We believe we should have compassion towards ourselves."
Mm.
And it was pointing to a flaw, I think. I'm not a supporter of any kind of Buddhism anymore. I was a Buddhist for many years, but couldn't be bothered anymore. But coming to this point where the imbalance of narcissism, the dark triad, sociopathy, the human predator, the term that I borrowed from Robert Hare, is this imbalance of how much you give and how much you take.
Mm.
And I think that in balancing it all the other way, where you get nothing, you were just it means that the joy in the world can decline. Salt can lose its savor. So I think that's an amazing idea. And what was it that you saw after you'd made that decision? What was the beautiful thing that you, when you decided to enjoy things, what did you appreciate? What was there in the environment that moved you?
For me, it had to first begin inwardly and scripturally, contextually. And once I went through that study that night before I went to bed after having the conversation with the family, I saw that Paul said, I would prefer to be dead, but if I'm here to live, then I have to live sacrificially for your benefit. And so when I realized that becoming a mature person in the faith, even if it helped me, if it didn't translate to other people as something they would desire, then what's the point? So I should become something that isn't just internally helpful to me, but other people should look at my attitude and say, I want that too.
Yeah.
And it was a period of growth for me. So when I got up the next day, I could see that what a beautiful place that the God I believe in created for us. Look at these sea turtles. Look at nature. Look at my family. Look at how they're developing. Look how good we're. And instead of just having my mind on spiritual heaven, I was able to release myself and be able to appreciate life around me. And that hasn't been the case since I embraced this from the roadside experience. It's all been, this world is evil. I am just surviving in it. I don't care about all these things. And there's so much beauty that I had not allowed in my life. It was ingratitude, really. It was ingratitude on my part not seeing the whole picture.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately, there's a reason I have that ingratitude for the world, because when I start to have gratitude for it, I realize the people in it drive me crazy and I want to kill them on short notice. So at this point, I'm not sure what I think it comes when you're around people. Be someone who enjoys life. Inwardly, just stay away, arm's length from this world, because I cannot manage how it works.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, the quietist notion, the idea of removing yourself from the world and all the snares and tangles of the world, because, you know, it will be distressing. Sometimes you'll want to thump somebody. And
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah.
my thumping is really violent, and it's not measured with reason. And I told somebody I saw an interview the other day, I said, I don't care about you enlightened guys. I don't live life to be enlightened. If there is no God in my world, I will hurt you as an enlightened guy. And that's a frightening idea.
Yeah. And yeah, I can see what you're saying. I mean, for me, enlightenment was an obsession from the age of 17 for almost 40 years. So I went all the way through Scientology, still looking for the Buddhist, you know, samadhi, satori, whatever. And I was obsessed with it. It was in everything for me. So, you know, I wanted to be and sought to be a good parent, a good husband. I wanted to help people because that seems right to me, that we should have caritas, we should charity, we should look to do something good for the world, to make the world a better place, to ameliorate, to make things better.
Let me ask you, John, why? Why
What?
did you want that?
It's a vital question. I had a, you know, wasn't a roadside experience. It was a bathtub experience, in fact. And this was in July 1991, and I'd been out on a formal intervention to talk with a very convinced fanatical Scientologist. And I'd gone out with Hannah and Jerry Whitfield, and because they wanted me to work with them, and I'd got this case over here, so I invited them over. And while I talked with hundreds of people about their beliefs, they had all come to me. And here I was suddenly in a room with somebody who didn't know what was going on. I think it was the first time I was involved in such a thing, and it was such a scrambling experience. I was sleep deprived for 5 days, had about 3 hours sleep each night, and realized that's how members of Scientology's the organization live every day. I'd never been subjected to that, you know. And you know, your concentration goes, your memory doesn't work properly, you're irritable, then you get elated, you know, all, you know, kind of, it's awful. And at the end of it, unfortunately, yeah, we were followed by 7 carloads of Scientologists, and I had good enough connections to be able to check the number plates and find that out. And as we were 200 miles away from where they were, that these 7 cars are all registered in the town where they live, was a bit of a clue. They had a private detective, a guy called Donald William Cooper from Las Vegas, who'd followed the Whitfields in. They were watching us with long Tom lenses every day. For 4 days, they tried to find out where we were going to talk to this young man, and they never did, because along the way, 2 people volunteered who knew the family and happened to have a house next door to this little house that the family owned. One of them happened to be in 14 Int, which is the British counter-terrorist unit of the Special Boat Squadron. So they are the most highly trained military people in the United Kingdom, either SAS or SBS people. And then he's in this specific unit where, you know, you could go and live in the loft of a terrorist without them knowing it for a month, eating just wood lice and raw wood and, you know, whatever. And then you could go down and murder them on behalf of good and truthfulness and righteousness and the government. He was trained to do that. And he said things like, did you know that you can set fire to a Land Rover because the body's made of aluminium? It's like, or aluminum in the proper American form, which is our aluminium's wrong, I'm told. Who'd have thought? But you can set fire to them because he'd done it. And what they were doing was they're going around with suspected members of the Irish Republican Army and harassing them in this way. So he was highly trained. He was actually a lovely guy. What I've said there doesn't really sound good, but he was. So he had this guy teaching us how to evade them. Then on the last day when the guy had decided that he was going to leave, he thought about it, and they still hadn't found us. And this newspaper reporter stops one of the Whitfields in the street and says, we're going to print this story about you kidnapping somebody on Sunday. Oh. So on Friday evening, I had to talk a solicitor into making a contract with the lawyer and the family so that the family wouldn't be named. And it's just that. So it was so wound up. I mean, the journalist who went to the lawyers with me burst into tears. When he got back, his photographer burst into tears. We'd got everybody wound up and on edge. And then I got home and I was just freaked out. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And I sat in the bath one day. You remember, this is a bathtub experience. And I went to myself, yeah, is it right that I try to love everybody? An agnostic, right? And I don't know, you can't think about that. That's true. You should do that. You should love everybody. That's right. You should love all of humanity. And then it just kind of, and it wound up being 3 days of thinking. And when eventually I said, this is an unquestionable assumption. I can't have unquestionable assumptions. I have to be able to question everything I believe. I question the idea that I should love everybody. And I decided after 3 days, there is no obligation for me to love everybody. There really isn't. Yeah. I should not harm people. I should do what I can to help people. But having, sacrificed myself to this idea. So it's a long answer to a short question. But these are obligations from infancy, from my Christian upbringing. I was incredibly lucky. I was born into a really nice family. My mum, as a teenager, had been a Sunday school teacher. She was an Anglican Christian. We went to church every Sunday until I was 11 and started developing a sleep disorder and said, could I not go to church on Sunday morning? And my mum, bless her, was liberal enough that she never had a conversation with me that would have been, I'll go to Evensong, but I can't do the mornings because they keep sending me to school every day and I don't get enough sleep. And so I stopped going to church, and then when I was 13, stopped believing in that. I didn't stop believing in goodness. I didn't stop believing in if God is the goodness in the universe. I didn't stop believing in that. I just stopped believing as I looked at the way that Christians practice in the, forgive me, somewhat psychopathic behaviors of Christian organizations. That the Anglican Church at that time invested in the arms industry. Recently, they had a crisis where the Archbishop of Canterbury, well, recently, 15 years ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury complained about payday loans, these incredibly high interest loans that, you pay 30% for a week, and then realized that the Church of England owned one of the companies that does this. Since then, of course, we've had, I'm told that on YouTube, I have to say SA scandals throughout the Catholic, the Baptist, the Jehovah's Witness, the Anglican, and the Methodist, all of them. And I'm kind of going, what on earth does this have to do with the Gospels? Any of this?
None of it.
None of it. So no. I don't have a significant problem with the Gospels or the teaching of Jesus. I have a significant problem with Christian organizations. And, so I want the truth. And if it's nasty, okay, that's that. We've talked about this before. At the age of 14, I decided I wanted to know the truth. And I have just one thing I've realized. If we well, it's Dave Matthews. We talked about Dave Matthews before, going and seeing him last month in London. And there's a line where he says, with kindness as your king, you will reach heaven before you reach your end. I believe that. I believe that we should be kind, because otherwise we will be miserable.
Yeah.
There is no way that harming other people, distressing other people will lead to us being happy, unless, of course, we're tyrannical sadists.
Right. Right.
And can kill enough people to make us happy, So Genghis
That's
Khan
right.
might have been happy, but I don't think so.
John, I want to point out that my personal self that has been developed by what I believe is the Spirit of God loves a man like you, and loves the state that you've come to, and believes that you, this is my way of seeing it, that you have God in you without knowing who it is, that you acquiesce to a spirit that is good, and therefore you're fine, because we don't need religion here, okay? But the sociopathic side of me has no understanding of this man that's talking to me. He thinks that you are stupid for thinking that you gotta love people. Because there is a self-interest reason to prey on people. Might makes right, and that is how the world should work. Who cares about happiness? None of us. We're not happy when we're loved. We're not happy when we act violently. So if we're not happy either way, I'm gonna fend for myself through violence and strength. So this is why my claim to God, or a spirit of God, or Jesus, or whatever, does help someone like me overcome those natural propensities to love someone like you. But it's my maturity in the faith to also look at you and say, you're just as right with God as I am, and to not do any judging.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so much a matter of interpretation, and people become so confused and upset. Atheists want me to say I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
And there's no such thing as agnosis. And I'm well, actually there is. There is a point where you can say, I don't know.
Of course.
And of course, I also know, my expert subject is how you can con people into believing things.
Yeah.
Or cults, as they're also known.
Yeah.
So we just got a chapter. Steve Hassan and I did a chapter together for a book on psychiatry and Eastern religion and spirituality. I think it's called that, and it's coming out with Springer. And in drafting this chapter, I put together all of the all of the basic techniques that I'm aware of that will bring about what people consider to be a transcendent experience.
Wow.
And for the first time, and I'm talking about here about Eastern religions, for the first time, I realized that I don't know of any religious group that doesn't use one of these techniques. That, fasting, staying up all night, davening, where you're rocking backwards and forwards, chanting, repeating mantras, staring at things, or meditation, as it's also known. All of these things have physiological effects.
Yeah.
And getting past that and into an actual transcendence, because I don't deny the possibility, but I have now met so many people who've, convinced themselves. So, for example, the Rajneeshis use hyperventilation. So they go, hoo, 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 and get very dizzy. I had a guy in the counter cult world who devised this method for himself. And he was telling me, oh, this is what I do. I bring up the old trauma by hyperventilating, and it releases the trauma. And I'm kind of, no, it releases the trauma you've just induced. It's like I've stopped banging my head against the wall. But he was convinced that he'd found the supreme technique. It actually registered by Stanislaus Grof, who was an experimenter with LSD. And when LSD was made illegal, he left Czechoslovakia, went to the US, and taught hyperventilation so you can get dizzy. And confusing dizziness with the experience of God is a bit silly, frankly.
But it happens all the time.
It does. And then people desperately hold on to it. Having dealt with so many born agains who really felt absolutely ebullient and wonderful from their experience. And then 6 months later, the infatuation had gone. And they then have to desperately convert other people. You know, it's one of the things that I've always liked from first meeting you, that you don't waste time on that nonsense, you know.
No.
We have to be what we teach. We have to exemplify our beliefs. And we do, like it or not. People can see how we behave and, you know, how many laugh lines we've got and that kind of stuff. It becomes obvious who somebody is. Though I posted a video the other week with Mark Vicent, and who was made the vow about his long association with Keith Raniere. And what a lovely man. You know, I really liked him. But somebody wrote in the comments, "Run from this man, Mark, run." It's
Wow.
like,
oh, well, you terrifying human being.
I am terrifying. That is the main thing, is the eyes, isn't it? It's the
yeah.
So I got a couple more things here,
Yeah.
which have interested me, and on which your opinion would be valuable. And first is quite simply the domains and traits of the psychopath, by Robert Hare. And he says the interpersonal effects are that the psychopath, and I presume the sociopath too, this is a bit difficult, isn't it? The person is superficial, grandiose, and deceitful.
Yeah, I can see that.
We touch on grandiose.
Yeah.
You think of anything from your past life, your life before, about grandiosity, about exalting yourself above others?
Well, I still have it in some sense. I still think I can reform the entire Christian world after 2,000 years of practice. So my grandiose ideas have not faded. I still have that. But for me, it has moved from it's gonna happen to this is my hope. This is what I go for. I have big ideas. I'm an all or nothing guy. So, but grandiosity is certainly there. My mother-in-law used to say, she used to believe that if she bought a lottery ticket from my encouragement, that she would actually win.
What an
I
interesting
have a
idea.
lot of that in me, but it is natural too. That's just what I am. So how it crosses over into being sociopathic, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as the song goes, you've got to have a dream, because if you don't have a dream, how are you going to make a dream come true? And what a great thing South Pacific is. And we run into this it's really interesting. We run into this here because I live in an embarrassment culture. So you not only are not meant to blow your own horn, you're not meant to admit you've got a horn in this culture, you know. Whereas in the US, it's much more Donald Trump, you know, it's much more acceptable. So, you know, if I say anything positive about myself, then there has to be a tinge of, oh dear, you know, I'm boasting again. This is braggadocio. This is not right, which it is partly a Christian upbringing and partly the English embarrassment, you know, kill my children, but don't embarrass me, do anything, but don't embarrass me. You know, the loss of face, which I think the Chinese are quite famous for as well. So and there's this thing, it's like, if I'm going to paint a picture, then do I need to have belief in myself to do it? And I think you probably do. I mean, there's work in psychology that says if other people don't support and encourage you, you won't do anything. You'll give up on everything. Now, I haven't. I'm still working at it. You know?
Yeah.
But how much self-belief, how much self-esteem is necessary, and when does that become grandiose? What Craig Malkin, who's supposed to be an eminent authority on narcissism, he's at Harvard Med School, he says that narcissism is a feeling of specialness, and that there's such a thing as healthy narcissism, which is just feeling special enough. It's the kind of Goldilocks position of specialness. And then there's what he calls egoism, which where you don't feel special at all. You know, and if anybody brings you a birthday cake, it's like, oh no, don't, you know, don't celebrate me in any way. And I think that's a stupid idea, healthy narcissism. And I think that defining narcissism as feeling special really misses the point. But that's the grandiosity. That's the feeling special element here. So, you know, when you were a kid, what did you think about yourself? You know, what did you think you were going to be? Did you think you were a great person, or?
Yeah, I thought I was great, and I thought my every idea was great, and I thought everybody else's ideas were ridiculous, and they were dumb, and they didn't know how to live. My grandiosity now has been sublimated to the idea that there is a person much, much bigger than me, a being that knows far more than I do. So I take my grandiosity willingly, purposely work on doing this and say, if anything works, it's going to be through him, because I will mess everything up, because I always have. I really always have.
Yeah. So that, lovely. Do you know the Randy Newman song, Guilty?
Yeah. Well, what a great songwriter.
Oh, he's just magical. And for
Yeah.
just for decades, he just keeps on pouring it forth. There's a one, do you know the song Shame?
I don't know him. I just know short people, but that was so funny because I liked it because I knew what he was doing, and everybody hated me for liking it.
Yeah, and
he said it's mean.
Yeah, he's a satirist, and
yeah,
he's gone after things. But in fact, there are conventions of short people that gather to throw rotten tomatoes at his picture, you know, and it's like the song Rednecks. You know, we can't tell our ass from a hole in the ground, you know. It's like, and then he uses the N-word and gets told off for that. But it's pretty obvious why he's using it, that he is in opposition to this idea. But yeah, brilliant man. But in the song Guilty, you have that sense of, you know, I can't stand myself. It takes a whole lot of medicine for me to pretend that I'm somebody else. And so you have somebody who is utterly remorseful, which would be leads us to the next set of statements, which are about the affective or emotional. That's a clever psychological word. A person lacks remorse, lacks empathy, and doesn't accept responsibility. So you now have remorse, you have empathy, and you appear to be accepting far too much responsibility, as you are going to transform the entire Christian world. And let me explain just how dangerous this is. This planet is in a galaxy that has 100,000 million stars, and it's one of 100,000 million galaxies. So set your sights higher. Don't just think about
You're awesome.
Thank you. In some way
I have to say something in response to that, though, John, that I do think humans, I'm sorry for the theology made in God's image, do, through the life lived and the heart created in this life, contribute to a universal light or dark force. I think that what we're contributing to here is the force of light to prevail over the force of dark. So there is a universal application to every individual's life, in my estimation.
I agree. And it for me is, and you can work at it from absolutely the other end, from the idea of cultural transmission in evolution, that we are accumulating and getting further. There is a point about light and darkness that needs to be made and remade. Darkness is not an actual quality. It's an absence of light.
That's right.
And so by bringing light, you know, we can sometimes, you know, manage to see what's in the shadows and get it to scuttle out, where we can do something to either banish or help it. I don't know.
Do you personally find power in darkness? Have you dabbled in the dark?
No, never.
I have.
Yeah.
There's a power in that absence of light. I don't know how to describe it. I don't think it's an entity. That's why I don't believe in a Satan that's necessary today. It's just merely light and dark, and the absence of it is one frightening place. And I would categorize or describe deep sociopathy or psychopathy as when you are ultimately ensconced in that, that's the dark.
I mean, looking at the life and times of Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, the creator of Scientology, he was very, very smart in some ways, very cunning, very vulpine. And he didn't, it was not until 2 years after he died that something he'd written that was released, and it was only released to people on the new highest level of Scientology, which is the 8th operating Thetan level. That level was released after he died. He'd promised that, and I have the text where he promises it, he had promised that in the classification and gradation chart of Scientology, that in this state, you would be at cause over physical, mental and physical matter, energy, space, and time. You would be able to make things appear and disappear. You'd be able to blow up planets. You would be at cause over matter, energy, space, and time. So that was the promise made in the early 1970s and quickly withdrawn, but I still have the printed version. When this level came out, it doesn't appear to actually work, but oddly enough, just like the rest of Scientology. But there was an issue for the first week after this course was released. And so only people who, the few hundred people who got to the level 7 would see this thing, having paid a large amount of money. And in this thing, Hubbard said that he was the Antichrist, that he was Lucifer, and that he had come to destroy the works of Christ. It was withdrawn a week later. We know about it because 2 people who took the course talked about it. And ultimately, the head of Scientology's technology, a man called Jesse Prince, talked about it. Curiously, it had already been leaked to me before it got onto that course. Somebody had actually found it, and I didn't believe it. I just didn't believe it. Could the man be that stupid? They withdrew it, of course, because people would read this, and some good people, having been in Scientology for years, would go, I don't want anything to do with this. He's the Antichrist,
Wow.
So
you just hit something so deep in me that I've been seeking to get my hands around, light and dark, and the purpose behind these L. Ron Hubbard types and the Joseph Smith types and I mean, he may have assigned it Antichrist. Whatever the titles don't matter to me. You're talking about something that strikes strongly to my core beliefs.
Yeah, and
light and dark.
I think we have to create evil for it to exist, but it most certainly does exist.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing happening in Gaza at the moment, I cannot construct as anything other than pure evil. And I'm absolutely no supporter of Hamas, and I've spoken against terrorism. I've written about terrorism. I do not support it, but I do understand that this total annihilation is evil, and the murder of civilians, the murder of children is never permissible. So there is, we can think of them as light and darkness. Darkness is ignorance. Light is understanding. Darkness is selfishness. Light is the understanding that we are codependent. I don't mean that in the psychiatric sense of the term, that we depend on one another. And that to be otherwise means that we will otherwise be lonely, isolated, sad. There is no virtue in the path that leads that way. Now, Ron Hubbard's oldest son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., commonly known to Scientologists as Nibs. He was his father's deputy from the age of 18 in 1952 to the age of 25 in 1959. So he was for 7 years right next to his father. He wrote an autobiography, which has never been published. I'm told I have one of 6 copies. And in it, he talks about his father's worship of the devil, fundamentally. And he believes that his father had opened the door to hell. And it's very interesting reading. It's very interesting to see whether I believe Hubbard's characterization, which I don't tend to, because I don't tend to believe very much he said at all, or whether he believed these things. And he did believe these things. And he then set up this organization, which was to enslave people. And there are currently about 4,000 people who are classifiably slaves. They have no control over their own lives. They're not allowed to have children. They never get a night's sleep. You know, I've interviewed people who were limited to 2 hours sleep a night, at which point your body starts to break down. Their diet is not right. They work a 90-hour week. This woman I talked with, in 3 years, she'd had 3 days off. So you get this thing of whatever evil is, whatever it comes from, it does exist in our world. And there are people who are recruited into it, who become part of it. I mean, most of these Sea Organization slaves are good people. But, you know,
that's my heart for the Mormons.
Yeah,
they're really good people.
Yeah,
but they're slaves. They're
Yeah.
slaves. So are fundamentalist Islam, fundamentalist Jews. All this religion enslaves. It's a form of the dark.
Yeah.
I got to tell you something. Honestly, from my heart, this can go down into the artificial intelligence queue that will forever make up. But I think you're one of the most Christian men I've ever met.
Oh,
I think that you have a better understanding of what goodness and truth is outside of the parameters of BS religion. I really do think that about you. And I've spent my life trying to figure out what this faith is. It's not dogma. It is what you've come to as a man without it.
Yes.
And one extra thing, not to promote the take I have on faith, but my perspective is we all now are in a place to choose how you want to live. And you have chosen to pursue the light and to live. And that, I believe, someday you'll learn came through Christ, but that's almost irrelevant in this world. That's something you choose, but it's not punished. It's not, you are part of the light. And I really appreciate what you've become, because you're what the principles that you value are at the highest end of the principles of what Christianity should be. It's not, it's a joke, but you really represent it. And you make, for me, you make an example of someone who doesn't have, we don't have knowledge. I'm sorry to rant. You call yourself an agnostic. Come on, we're all agnostics. We are all without knowledge. We are all just either believing or not.
Yep.
And the beliefs we have are not based in knowledge. It's evidences we choose to see as something, but not knowledge. So you're an agnostic, and so am I, and so is every damn religionist on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
I applaud your bravery. I really do, John.
Thank you. I'm touched.
I mean it from my heart. I don't say shit anymore that I don't mean.
Yeah, that's a good way to be. It's definitely a good way to be.
It is, isn't it?
It makes life a lot easier.
Yeah.
Okay. That seems like such a major thing, that just carrying on, you know, without, you know.
We'll go on later.
No, it's just, I think we need to talk about that rather than going on with the other bits about, you know, what psychopaths are like or not. But Eric Fromm, who I largely admire, his book, To Have or to Be, I think is one of the most important books I've ever read. I read it this year. I read it in Istanbul. And I've read 6 of his other books over the years, over the decades, in fact. And this was the last, you know, he actually wrote a book about called Greatness and Limitations in Freud's Thinking or something like that. That was his actual last book. Nobody needs to know that. But his last major work was To Have or To Be. And he puts himself forward as a mystical agnostic, or an agnostic mystic. And I was delighted when I found that, because I've described myself that way for many decades. That and it's so important what you say. None of us have the gnosis. None of us have the knowledge. And
Not one.
only somebody utterly arrogant would believe they did. The boundaries of my understanding are so small compared to what there is to know. But we can, and my quest has been to use evidence to demonstrate to me the simple reality that we have to be kind. We don't necessarily have to love everyone. That's a bit far to go, but we should be kind. And I've recently found myself in a situation, which I won't go into any of the details, where I'm being told not to talk to somebody. And it's horribly reminded me of why I left Scientology, when I was told not to talk to somebody. And there was this sort of presumption in Scientology, what the Christian scientists call malicious animal magnetism, that there are people who to Scientologists are called suppressives, who you mustn't associate with them because their evil will, infect you in some way. And when I left Scientology, the first thing I did was go and find people who'd been labeled suppressive and talk with them. And I found some of the most delightful people. And yeah, this thing about the presumption of knowledge, the idea that I know something. No, I have some framework of meaning and purpose and motivation and some idea of those things. But yeah, it's important to have at least that modicum of humility that says, despite people calling me a know-it-all, and it does happen.
Yeah.
I'm not anywhere near, but I do have, certain convictions about how we ought to live. And it horrifies me seeing how quickly people will advocate a noble cause and then act with no nobility whatsoever. They so one of the things that's said in the counter cult world is that cult membership, people in cults have black and white thinking. They have polarized thinking. Everything's right or wrong, black or white. And then you come out and you find the very people who are trying to tell you this have black and white thinking about their opponents in the counter cult field. No, which I found right from, the moment I left Scientology. There were people who wanted to do horrible things to Scientologists. And I'm kind of, somebody called me an anti-Scientologist at one point. In fact, I've been called it a few times. And it's like, no, I'm the only pro-Scientologist in the world. I've done everything I've done to help Scientologists.
To help them. Yeah.
But so there we are.
We're in the same boat when it comes to Mormonism. Let me ask you something. We share that commonality. Let me ask you, John, would you think that of the traits of the dark, one of the most prevalent, revelatory, or the deepest trait that might represent the dark is control? Needing to control narrative, thought, action, life, money. Do you see that as something that you are personally repulsed by?
Absolutely. That in talking with people, I hope I'm grown up enough to realize that I'm not trying to persuade anybody of anything other than that they should think, that they should.
Oh God, we're
consider.
brothers. We're brothers. And this is not the sociopath speaking. It's my heart of hearts, man. Fully, you are more my brother than the Christians I meet, because that's all we want is to think. Yeah.
And
think.
and that is liberation. That,
yes.
from wherever we stand. allowing people. And I mean, I think it's really just a matter of growing up. I think it's really just a matter of maturity, that the vast majority of people will not grow up. They don't want to grow up. They want to be in a situation partly of dependency upon others, and partly of control of others. That balance. And it's like with my kids. I've got 4 kids, and so I'm incredibly lucky. Got 4 kids, and they're all now adults. And my perception is, when the child is born, it's completely helpless, and your job is to get it to the point, round about age 18. My mum used to say age 35, where they'll be able to be responsible for themselves. And that's where we're headed. And we just live in a culture that doesn't want that. It wants everybody to be an adolescent. So they'll buy the products and the bullshit that is coming down. So, we live in this conflicted world where people, black and white polarized. It's appalling. And very soon, a movement that comes along to help the oppressed will become an oppressive movement. So, and around we go, the sociopaths, psychopaths, antisocial personalities, Machiavellians, narcissists, whatever we're going to call this stuff, human predators, will take control. And as you say, the essential characteristic of such a person is the desperate need to control. I've often wondered, seeing how much Hubbard sought to control his environment. And this comes down to, this is a man who the Guinness Book of World Records says was the most prolific author of all time. And when you get into the small print, he wrote a policy on how to put flowers in a vase, or vase, as you say in America. And he points out that you mustn't knock the vase against the faucet, or tap, as we call it here. This is very complicated, isn't it? Having to translate as we go. You mustn't knock the vase against the faucet. And you kind of go, wow, here is wisdom. That he spends his time, how to clean windows using newspaper. And I'd just like to warn everybody, it depends whether the newspaper has oil-based or water-based ink on it. When he was advocating this, it often had oil-based ink on it, so you get a black window. So it's part of the technology of Scientology. It doesn't work. That when he had hundreds of people on the ship with him, he'd look at the menus every day. So it'd be, do they have rice and beans, or beans and rice? Micromanaging everything, getting down into everything. Jesse Prince, who I mentioned before, who in the 80s, in the lead up to Hubbard's death, was in charge of all of the so-called counseling in Scientology. And he said that one of the tasks he was set was that every week on a Thursday, the hundreds of Scientology organizations would send their reports in as to how much money they'd made, how many letters they'd written, how many hours they'd audited or fraudited people for. And they had to be sent to Hubbard. So this guy, who's by this time definitely suffering from dementia, let alone anything else, Jesse tells this great story where he's saying that the boss of Scientology, David Miscavige, had assigned him to be the relay point for all of these statistics, just all printed out, all bankers' boxes full of these things. And he looked at them and he went, oh dear, everybody that does this gets busted. Every week somebody is busted for this. What am I going to do? So Jesse decided he'd just send the boxes. He wouldn't fill in the form saying, I've checked everything. He decided he wouldn't do that for some reason. And he got a commendation back from Hubbard, because Hubbard said, oh, you've understood that the ink in the pens has rose perfume in it, used by the psychiatrist. Okay. So you've got this complete nutcase who his control is that absolute. So he's looking down and saying, so I mean, the way Jesse got his job was, one week Hubbard said, who's done the most well-done auditing hours, one of the statistics of Scientology, in the Scientology world. And Jesse in Chicago got picked, and he suddenly got this job, and has wild stories about it. But that degree of control. I think, there is so much more. There is so much more, but I think we're probably going to have to take a pause, because let's face it, we're going to have exhausted anybody who's been brave enough to keep watching this for this amount of time. They're probably sitting there going, do these guys ever stop? Does that John Atack ever stop talking? You know,
we can talk forever. I really can. I love this because it's so rare in this world,
isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's what we should be doing. And it's understanding. I do talk a lot, but it's understanding that in the course of this conversation, you have given me so much that's significant. I mean, what you say about deciding to enjoy yourself. If we're talking about empathy, empathy is also, it's not just feeling something with other people, it's being open to that. And I bless the world. You know, there's a Muslim saying that Allah created the world, created humanity so that humanity could enjoy his beauty, could share in his beauty. And it's a lovely idea.
It is.
Rather than sharing in the immense suffering. You know, while we were talking about enjoyment, I suddenly thought about the flagellant processions in Europe in 1347 and thereafter. You said people say, oh, he dates things, you know, but it's just how I remember things. The Black Death came and about a third of the European population was dead. And there were these processions of people who would, Christians, so-called, who would take a leather strap and put iron nails through it, and walk the streets going, oh, woe is me. That's how absurd it can become.
Yeah.
God forgive me because I'm doing this horrible thing to myself. I don't believe in that God. I think that's the wrong God.
Yeah, right with you.
Yeah. So, always a pleasure. We'll do it again in a few weeks' time.
I look forward to it, John.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all you do. Thank
you too, Shawn. You've been, and I know we've both said that we don't believe in enlightenment, but you've been very enlightening today. Thanks a lot. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.